Welcome everybody to the last specialized session of this conference. And there is an advantage to be the last because you can refer back to something you heard before. So I will try and do that during our session. It might not be a surprise to you that the first presenter is not going to present research. He's going to present how you get the knowledge that we have acquired to our children, our teachers, our schools, our employees, because that's what his organization does. I've known John Atkin for a long time. He is a great guy. He knows what he's talking about. He's a dedicated teacher, water person, and he's going to give us his first insights. My dear friend John, thank you. The floor is all yours.
Classic. Lesha, it's a pleasure. Esteemed panelists, thank you for having me. I'm blessed to go first, but also a little sad because I don't get to interact with your presentations as well, but I'll throw mine out there and as food for thought for you. So thank you again, John Atkin. I'm the CEO of the Project WET Foundation, which is Water Education Today. And my talk is on Beyond the Data. How can your great research affect change? And in saying that, I know full well that every one of you that's doing research thinks about the application of that data. However, I'm going to give you maybe a different approach or maybe be a little provocative in how we do it in a way. So we're all water people. I think most of us are water people. You know that, of all the water available on the planet, which covers 71% of us, only 0.003% is available to drink. And in the 20th century, even though the population grew, the amount of water use, the rate of water use grew 6x, just to give you an idea. So clearly, these are tiny coverage of the many issues around water going forward. But I just wanted to introduce these because water education and health are closely connected in every society on Earth, and they have been for centuries, in fact, millennia. So the challenges of water and sanitation in this example have been going since 2500 BC. The Indus civilization actually had sewer systems with manhole covers even, so that they could be cleaned and unblocked. The Ashanti Kingdom, this is the 18th century in West Africa, had sewage pipes which were cleaned daily with boiling water, and even remote villages had public toilets. And you think about the challenges that they faced back then versus what we have today with our technology and resources, and we still face the same challenges. So this was said at the turn of the century by the Director General of UNESCO. Improving the quality of our life implies a change in our learning. So I'll just read it. Education in all its forms and at all levels is not only an end in itself, but is also one of the most powerful instruments we have for bringing about changes required to achieve that sustainable development that we're all shooting for. So I'll say it this way. We learn from the past while sustaining our future, and how can your research affect that change? And I propose that translating your research into hands-on learning opportunities for a different audience. We understand that there are technicians that take up your research daily. There are businesses and entrepreneurs who are using that research to make big changes. I propose that if we think about starting earlier, and I'm talking about with young children, pupils, teachers, and citizens that you may not think you can reach, if you can reach those, they can affect change through understanding and action. So in this case, Project WET, we build curriculum, we build activities, we build materials and methods for to allow people to teach their audiences. And in this case, every one of our activities has an action component. So we call it action education. The reality is the learning is important and the understanding is critical, but if it doesn't result in action, whether it's cleaning a stream or using water less or whatever those actions are, then we feel that's a wasted opportunity. So why do we do this for the young children? The next generation of global leaders, who are today's children, will need to be aware of these complex water issues facing them. They need to have the knowledge and the skills to address these problems. And these are 21st century skills, meaning team approaches and technology and all the other pieces that they're being taught in school right now. A recent survey of global water education leaders indicates that the most critical ages to begin water education is from ages 4 to 11. So this is something that I hear from PhDs and researchers all the time. Look, my college age students understand this stuff, but they don't have the background. It takes a long time to get the background in. And if we could start younger to getting them to understand, for instance, the hydrologic cycle or how groundwater works, the process of understanding into adulthood would be that much cleaner, as well as the potential for creating these lifelong learners who are dedicated not only to understanding, but also to action. We talk about these global water problems escalating and affecting the life for billions of people. The new technologies required to handle this increased demand for water, which will be very soon 8 billion people. It'll be these children, these students, who will be developing these innovations as we go forward. So then we have the teachers. We have this amazing audience of students out there around the world. The primary person that they look up at every day in that classroom is the teacher. And they are really one of the primary targets for the Project WET Foundation and our work at Water Education Today. And we train well over 15,000 teachers a year. Through that process, we can reach, in fact, in 2020, we reached 2.8 million people around the world through an amazing network of partners. But this change maker opportunity comes at the educator level, where they can impact student day after day, year after year, with these important messages. And as you see, by empowering students through an understanding of the relationship between the life they lead every day and their everyday actions and water, they can catalyze change. A very famous example is recycling in the United States, as sort of anemic as it is. Recycling wasn't popular 25 years ago. It turns out that it started in the schools. So schools started recycling, students brought the concept home to their parents, and now, for the most part, we have great recycling in the US, although, that's a whole different conversation. So we look at impacts. I actually just looked at some draft numbers for our 2020 impacts. Because of the digital nature of our work now, based in COVID, and we pivoted very quickly into the digital world, we increased the number of countries that we reached last year from 82 to 107. We increased our total reach from 2.5 million to 2.8 million people trained and had delivered these water education messages. And that includes both teachers and students, as well as others that I'll talk about in just a moment. So, this is a bit old now. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you in the audience, understand all the different diverse audiences that need to be reached. And they're not always the choir, as we say, when we reach the choir, teaching to the choir. So we have pioneered into doing the same types of hands-on education training with multinational corporations. So there are several examples that we have, and the one that I'll refer to often is the Levi's, as in Levi's jeans, where they came to us and said, our employees are doing all of these volunteer efforts on these volunteer days, in their local community, but they're not connecting the dots between the work of Levi's to save water and the manufacture of their garments to what they're actually doing in the community. So Project WET came in. We basically implemented an education curriculum, or module, if you will, that helped them understand the life cycle of a pair of jeans, a pair of 501 jeans, and how much water is used throughout the process and where. And it turns out that almost 25% of the water used in making a pair of jeans, which is 1,700 liters, it turns out that most of that, a quarter of that, happens after those jeans are sold to you and I. So that's when you start to see their marketing campaign around wash less and spot clean and washing cold and all the different things that can save water. Well, that's their marketing message, but underneath that is the understanding of how do you actually save water and why do you save water. So I think the why in this case is really important. And that's what we focus on at the corporate level. We want their corporate employees, whether it's Levi's or others, to understand why water is important and why the water intake at the top of their factory and their discharge at the bottom of their factory are critical factors in understanding water stewardship. In this case, these are some maps with very relevant data that we've developed for many countries as a part of the Alliance for Water Stewardship certification process. And I think we've developed over 40 of these maps now, posters we call them, that are educational tools, not only for the public, but also back into the company for the employees. I feel that, and often say that employees, corporate employees, are the first line of stakeholder when taking on any kind of educational or outreach effort. So a lot of companies and even governments, when they start thinking about reaching stakeholders, which is a very common term used these days, they always look outside, when in reality, the first line of stakeholders are right within your walls. So for instance, if you cannot, if your employee can't go to a social function and meaningfully and succinctly describe the sustainability work of your corporation, then you've missed a step. Those employees need to be able to talk about the good work that a company is doing. So lots of results and impacts. In the Levi's case, they ended up pledging several years ago to training 100% of their employees around the world in this water education curriculum that we developed, and we succeeded that within the timeline, and it's a great success story. Good things happening at Levi's and others. So this is Kofi Annan. The biggest challenge in this new century is to take an idea that seems abstract, such as sustainable development, and turn it into a reality for all the world's people. So underneath this is all the research that you're doing. The research on groundwater, the research on food and food deserts, and the research on drought and climate change. All of these pieces fit into sustainable development. But I propose that if you think about reaching new and different audiences and reaching them, in the case of students, at a much younger age with the right type of tool, there are changes to be made going forward. So with that, thank you very much. I look forward to conversation, debate, questions, and thank you very much for allowing me to present today. It's an honor.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. I was wondering, the session earlier today was talking about the fact that people still seem to think that water is a dumping site. That, if you want to get rid of your waste and whatever it is, you just dump it in the river, and because it's streaming, it will get out of your sight, but not necessarily out of sight. Is that an element that appeals to you to talk to with your students, or to make them understand what this type of behavior means to water management?
When I do trainings, Lesha, whether it's working with students or teachers, which we do often, or even corporations, my first question is, raise your hand if you know where the water comes from that you get out of your tap. And the second question is, where does it go when you flush your toilet? So that is a beginning point for almost everything that I do. And that gives me an idea of at what level they are at. And it's surprising how few people, probably wouldn't surprise this audience, but how few people actually understand the relationship of the water in their tap to the watershed out their door, or groundwater in springs that are nearby. And then again, the outflows on the disposal side. So to answer your question, it's a huge issue that we deal with. It is a very difficult issue, especially when you're talking about the systems of water. That's why we start with the basics of understanding the hydrologic cycle, that water is constantly recycled through this process, but there are pollutants that are added that can be very damaging, down the system, if you will. And then of course we get into runoff and watersheds and all the different parts of surface water that are connected, and then we build in the human impacts and human development side of that into the hands-on learning.
Another question or another issue I heard a lot was that people are afraid to reuse water because they've all been told, you know, urine is dangerous, poop is dangerous, don't touch it. So, you know, even if the wastewater is treated, you shouldn't be using it. So how do you tackle that? Because probably without treating and reusing our wastewater, I would say using our used water again, we're not going anywhere, are we?
It's the future, Lesha. You're exactly right. There's no question that the recycled water, water reuse, whatever it's called, is the future of water. And Singapore is an amazing example of success in this case, but it's being used all over the world. I actually started my original deck for you for this talk with the water reuse as an example of how challenging it can be to get people to understand the science versus the application of that. We all know that that water is clean. You know, the chemistry says you pull the contaminants out, you can drink that water, it's pure. I actually went back because of that and I read a few articles on this that I've had from the last several years. And the word disgust is actually D-I-S-G-U-S-T is actually the word that comes up in these research articles, both from the psychology side and the science, the sort of natural resource science side, that keeps people from drinking that water. And they gave the example of putting a sterilized cockroach, dipping it in a glass of clean water, and would someone drink that? And the reality is the cockroach is sterilized, the water is clean, it stays clean, but the disgust factor is too much for people to sort of mentally get over. And there's a little bit of talk of primitive man was, humans were trained not to eat or drink things that may cause illness. So, I understand that, but it's a fascinating topic. And so we have worked very deeply in this subject. And it turns out that when I talk to some experts, this toilet to tap saying is what needs to go away, because that was developed by a group that was against recycled water. And that was their tagline, to say recycled water is a bad thing to have. I forgot who the group was, but it was a marketing ploy to try to shut the process of, building these recycled water plants down. So we move away from that. We start talking about new water as they do in Singapore or other ways. But this is exactly my point. There are ways to teach people the value of recycled water without, in a hands-on way, and getting them to understand these concepts without bringing up these disgust factors. We can move past that.
Okay. Thanks, John. I'm going to move to one of our other distinguished people, and I saw one of my later panelists, Thijs, nodding his head all the time. So Thijs, you will get a chance to react to what John was saying when you're going to present. First, I'm going to Thoraya. Very pleased to see you. I think John gave you the ultimate heads up for your topic, because you're talking about curricula and how to get your knowledge to people. And in this specific case in Tunisia, which a lot of people might not firstly think about when they're talking about high-level research, but I'm quite convinced that you do have it. It just doesn't get the acknowledgement yet. So, Thoraya, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've been shaking my head because, in fact, I prepared very well the floor to my presentation. So I'm Thoraya Suissi. I'm a professor at the National Institute of Agronomy of Tunisia and the director of the agricultural higher education at the Institution of Agricultural Research and Higher Education, IRESA. So I will start by presenting briefly the Tunisian system and the major problem of challenges facing our agricultural and water sector. Then share with you our experience to develop curriculum based on competencies. This is the first time, and then conclude. So the Tunisian system of research and higher education is composed of 23 institutions between research, higher education, and development. And this system is being coordinated by the Institution of Agricultural Research and Higher Education, IRESA, which is founded in 1990 within the Ministry of Agriculture. And it has the mission to support these 23 institutions to achieve their missions in higher education, research, development, innovation, and transfer in various fields of agriculture. So right now, the system of agricultural research and higher education is at crossroads between challenges that have to face in higher education, mainly the employability of the graduates, and on the other side, the challenges in agriculture and water, climate change, and the depletion of natural resources are being the major ones. Despite the major role the agriculture is playing to Tunisian economy and its potential to generate employment, we have a decline in the employability of agriculture engineers over the years. This is attributed to many problems. Including, so the courses are not being aligned with the employer's needs. So there is this skill gap between what the employers are need and what we are teaching. And also the discipline-based curricular approach that is adopted by our institution, which is more or less like characterized by training courses toward more specialized skills, and there is low practical abilities and exposure to real world problems. On the other hand, also there are water management and resources is a major challenge facing our agriculture, especially within this context of climate change. So Tunisia is under absolute water scarcity, less than 500 cubic meter per capita and per year. Also, water allocation in agriculture is expected to decrease by 2030. So in this case, either we have to decrease irrigation or to enhance the water efficiency. Also, there is a problem of degradation of the quality of water caused by salinization and the release of contaminants. And this would require advanced treatment technology to be used for water supply and its use in irrigation. And also we need to develop efficient measures, solutions, and regulations to improve management of water resources, which is right now needs improvement and results in low water use efficiency. So therefore, to achieve and the sustainable development goals by 2030 and to set new goals, new innovative approach need to be put into practice by the future generation of agriculture engineers. And we believe that agricultural institution, they are in a perfect position to foster this next generation of professionals and leaders to address the above challenges. With this problem and challenges in agriculture and water sector have stimulated our higher education institution, in fact, to review and improve the study programs of engineers by tackling both the content and the method of teaching. So to do so, we adapted the approach of curriculum development based on competencies in three disciplines, including rural engineering, water, and forestry. The whole process based on a participatory approach is composed of 6 steps, beginning by analysis of a job market and employees' requirement, then formulation and determination of the competencies required, and eventually designing the appropriate program. So for the formulation of competencies, we used a variety of sources for information and techniques for data collection, including surveys with professionals, with graduates, students from our system. We also organized workshops with focus group of professionals. And also we compared what we are doing to other universities in order to identify area for improvements. So I'm gonna share some of the key findings of this work. So we identified the 3 domains of professional development in water sector in Tunisia: water resource and development, water sanitation and hygiene, wash, and irrigation. And for each of these 3 domains, we identified and formulated specific competencies that needs to be acquired by our students to tackle these challenges that the above challenges that I highlighted. And then for each specific competencies, we determined the program learning outcomes and the learning units. And we are right now in the process of determining the learning outcomes of the units and the models. We are, our work also, and from the surveys, we formulated the general competencies that needs to be developed in our curriculum, including the entrepreneurship and innovation, project management, communication, language, and effective use of ICTs. Also from the results of the data collected from the survey and the workshop, there is an essential need that our curricula be a general curriculum with more practical training courses and capacity for integrating across disciplines. It means that more multi and interdisciplinarity is needed in our curriculum. So modules like social science, soil chemistry and biochemistry, climate change, ecology, cropping system have been integrated in the core courses. Also, we found out that employers are asking for more hands-on skills, problem solving and critical thinking, also to be developed in our, are rated as important in education, but also on the other hand, more emphasis needs to be made to the way of teaching. It has to be also improved and encouraged for active learning, because this is crucial we found out that this is crucial for the enhancing the employment of our graduates. I believe to conclude that this is competency-based curriculum is an innovative approach to agriculture higher education and may offer a promising solution to bridge the gap in skills and empower our students to tackle specific problems in water and food science. And this way we are meeting the economic and societal needs and enhancing their employment. Thank you very much.
Okay, Thoraya, thank you. So I want to introduce my great colleague, Paddy Obani. So Paddy, I think there was one question from aimed at John, but I'll leave it to you to ask it now or
Yes,
handle
thank you
it
very
later.
much, Alicia. So John's typing an answer to the first question. It out so everyone hears. It's parallel to the awareness campaigns. Do you agree that the curriculum in schools should be developed? During one of my presentations or one of my awareness presentations, an 11-year-old boy told me, don't worry, the technology will resolve the water problems. So I think that's directed at John, and it's essentially about checking the content of the curriculum and what John thinks about that. So I think he's typing in an answer. That's been answered now. And then the second one is even in the year 2000, it was predicted by experts that there will be acute shortages. And is this prediction true or not? So that's also for John. And I think John is addressing that as well.
Okay.
Those are the two main questions we have. And I was going to add in one of my own for John.
Please.
Just wondering, do you think that in teaching water to children in school, it should be a standalone course? Or do you think this is something that should cut across, the different subject areas? Thank you.
I can answer that live quickly. It should be integrated. Petty, it's a great question for how to bring water into a curriculum. It obviously needs to meet the customizations and practices of that local curriculum and country and precinct or wherever they may be. However, integrating water across the curriculum, in my opinion, is the best way as a STEM opportunity. So science, technology, engineering, math. So water is a thread that works into math very well. It works into science. It works into social studies, works into civics, even governance. Also art and phys ed. We have, through Project WET, we have many, many activities that fit water into those pieces. And that I believe is the best way. When you get up to the secondary level and certainly in college, a very specific approach within the science is great. But having that broad understanding at a lower level, I think, is critical.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Alicia.
Okay, thanks, Patty. I just wanted to mention something if people have some time to do some research on Google or something. One of the nicest projects I have ever seen in my life was a project for the Youth Stockholm Water Week. So it was young people presenting their research and their innovative ideas. And one of them, which follows up on the remark that John just gave, was a project in the schools in Italy. So they were all students between 12 and 16 years old. And the schools did integrated projects. So what they did is, because I saw the question on the bottled water, this might answer part of your question. They researched all the bottled water that is being sold in Italy, which is enormous. It's like 40 different brands. And they analyzed them on minerals, on diets, on whatever you can find in those bottles, and came to some really nice product, which was actually a guide that they presented to the buyers in the supermarket to explain to them what was in their bottled water and what not. If you want to have a look at it, it's a wonderful project. And maybe, John, it's something that you might be able to use in your work. Having said that, I'm going to Habila Xingshang from Nigeria. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation. Happy that you could join us. And the floor is totally yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be on this platform and to participate in this online conference. My name is Zinjan, as you have said. I'm a lecturer with the National Water Resources Institute, located in Kaduna, Nigeria. Basically, this research work was carried out in somewhere in north central Nigeria, and it was because of the importance of how people tend to suffer in the dry season because of water scarcity, and of course there was an issue with their coloration of teeth, which is dental fluorosis. And as an introduction, water-rock interaction is among the leading mechanisms, of course, that causes that affects groundwater chemistry. The subsurface geology that make up the aquifer can determine a lot of things, especially parameters that make aquifer characteristics. And then the capacity to retain and to transmit water, which is selectivity and transmissibility, is very important here, because these are the things we're looking for. We're looking for the aquifer characteristics of the area and to also determine the groundwater quality. Okay, this is like this is the study area map, as you can see. Up there in the inset, there's the Nigerian map, and of course the outline there is the one that has been brought out here. The state. The state is Plateau State, and of course the shaded portion inside that big portion of the state is the local government area where the research was carried out. Okay, from the inventory of wells around the study area, it was discovered that the wells dry up completely, and they provide. And these are the materials that we needed for the research. We are carrying out mapping, GPS device for graphic base map, sampling kits, record, field notebooks, and then we have tools and instruments: geological hammer, pH meter, electrical conductivity, and TDS meter, thermometer, and measuring tape. Okay. Actually, the data from 25 boreholes within the study area were collated, and the essence of that is to be able to determine the yield, the transmissibility, and the hydraulic conductivity of the aquifer of the study area. And then the Cooper-Jacobs non-uniform straight line equation was adopted because it deals with heterogeneous aquifers, which is the dominant type of aquifers in the basement complex of Nigeria. And these are the formulas that were involved in developing these parameters, the aquifer parameters. Okay, the results that we got from our analysis of the data collected from that's the pumping test data collected from 25 boreholes within the study area. We discovered that the yield of the aquifers is 50 to 555 meter cube per day. That is the range. And the transmissibility is 0.892, 14.5 meter cube per day. Selectivity is given there. And the hydraulic conductivity is 0.3 to 2.43 meters per day. And this is the static water level for the entire study area, which is 2 to 15.42 meters. So after we got these results, we take it to the GIS environment, and we interpolated, and then we created the lines, and we did some things with the GIS applications to produce these maps. And here is the geological map. The first map is the geological map of the study area, where we have 4 rock units. And the area of interest, of course, is the one in the middle, which is the rock, the Pan-African older granite, which is a rock that is having the kind of constituents that produces fluoride, which was discovered to be high. The content of fluoride was discovered to be high in groundwater, and it's coming from this particular rock, which dominates the central portion of the study area. And the map on the right is the groundwater potential map. If you look at the groundwater potential map, you will see that the areas with the red color are areas that have very low groundwater potential, very low. And then one on yellow, it's low groundwater potential. And then the third one is the modern groundwater potential, and the fourth, which is like light blue, it has high groundwater potential. And there's only very few portions that have very high groundwater potential. So with these maps, we can say that this is how the study area groundwater groundwater aquifers behave. Okay, we carried out the physicochemical analysis of the groundwater study area, and we came up with this, and then we discovered that the groundwater is dominated by 60% of calcium bicarbonate, calcium magnesium bicarbonate, and that makes it to be classified as hard water. We also discovered that 37% of it contains sodium bicarbonate, and then 3% calcium magnesium sulfate. That's the entire groundwater of that study area. This is what we came up with. And this is the pipeline diagram on the right, which shows, if you look at it, it's not very, I tried to make it to come out very clearly, but from here, you can see that the activity, the groundwater from there, the constituents are dominating around the cations. The pipeline diagram is used actually to define these groundwaters, the way they have been represented in these percentages. Okay, the determined hydraulic characteristics are useful tools for groundwater prospecting in the study area. The groundwater potential is classified into 5 zones, like I mentioned earlier: very low, low, moderate, high, and very high potential zones. While the U of the class falls within the low to moderate class. This U is specifically peculiar with the basement complex of Nigeria. That's talking about the geology of Nigeria. It's specifically found around those regions of Nigeria. So the water quality results show high level of fluoride above the WHO limit of 0.5 to 1.5 milligrams per liter. Okay, as a recommendation, the fluoride concentrations of 3.47 milligrams in some parts of the study area is a source of public health concern because it causes dental fluorosis, teeth coloration, and then skeletal deformations in older groups of people. So it is above this limit. The limit is 1.5. That is the acceptable limit by WHO. So hence, it is necessary to treat both surface and groundwater to reduce the fluoride concentrations to the acceptable limits. And then that is another angle where future research can go in and try to develop treatment facilities for that, treatment technologies to strip off the fluoride and reduce it to the acceptable limits. And then detailed hydrological methods should be applied in groundwater prospecting to identify the true moderate yield of the for abstraction of water, sustainable rural supply. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Habila. I'm sorry that your connection was not really very good, but I think we got the most part of what you said and your slides. And I think you basically at the end, you put up a very difficult question, like the fluoride levels that are in our water, which are not very good for health, not if you get too much, because of course that's the big issue. And there's fluoride being produced naturally by nature, which is a big problem in some areas in the world. But it's also a big problem because there's still countries that are actually adding it to the drinking water, not realizing that they're overdoing it, which is, for instance, very bad for ladies like me. Because if you're older and you get too much fluoride, it's very bad for your bones.
Oh, yes.
Yes, oh yes. Having said that, Patty, how are we doing with the Q&A?
Thanks, Lisha, and thanks, Habila, for your presentation. I think we can go to the next presentation and then we'll catch up with more questions as they come along.
Okay, no problem. So, Thijs, you've been very patient, and I saw you nodding and participating, and so now the floor is all yours, and you're from Wageningen, so very close to my house.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So my name is Thijs Lange. Thank you for the opportunity to present here my work together with my which I did together with my colleagues Vincent Lindenhoff and Stijn Reinhardt. Yeah, and I'm a junior researcher at Wageningen Economic Research, part of Wageningen University. So nutrient-rich diets increase food security only if proper water quality is guaranteed. That was the main conclusion of the literature study. And in this study, we reviewed the literature about the interactions between water quality and food security. And these insights provide a better understanding between the complex dynamics between food systems, water systems related to water quality and food security. In areas with poor water quality, the promotion of nutrient-rich diets with perishable crops like fruits, vegetables, and fish can deteriorate food safety, while perishable foods are promoted, and perishable foods are prone to contaminants like heavy metals, bacteria, due to poor water quality used for irrigation, food processing, and meal preparation. However, due to a growth in demand for food production and as a result of an increased pressure on water resources, wastewater is more used for irrigating crops. And the use of untreated wastewater might in turn lead to negative effects on food safety, food security, and so also ultimately human health. So to ensure nutrient-rich diets with a positive effect on consumers' health, we need an integrated approach combining food systems and water system thinking. So here you see the food system approach, and it focused on diets instead only on individual value change. And the figure shows the food-related activities from farm to fork. And the outcome of the food system activity is food security, including food availability, food affordability, and food utilization, which can be seen on the right side of the figure. And in addition, there are socioeconomic drivers like markets, policy, and others that influence the 5 food system activities, and vice versa. Furthermore, environmental drivers like climate and biodiversity also affect food system activities, and food system activities in turn affect environmental drivers such as greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, and biodiversity. Each activity of the food system influences water quality. In the literature, there are many examples in ways food production affects water quality, like water pollution from fertilizers, which affects high concentration of nitrogen and phosphate in water resources, pesticides, and also pathogens and antibiotics from livestock production. And we found, however, we found only a few cases of how food processing affect water quality, and then especially on the effects from abattoirs on water resources, because untreated wastewater from abattoirs has a high concentration of pathogens, nitrogen, and phosphate. Thereby, food consumption itself also influences water quality, and these effects mainly come from human feces. Water pollution from food system also indirectly lead to pollution from other contaminants, like for example, nitrogen and phosphate can induce algae blooming, which release mycotoxins, and antibiotics in water resources can lead to development of antibiotic-resistant pathogens. So now we are focusing on one example. So it's our fruits and vegetables in the food system framework, because the consumption of fruits and vegetables are promoted as a vitamin-rich source. And in this situation, we're expecting that only poor water quality is used throughout the food system, whereby you can see that the contamination of, in this case, fruits and vegetables can be contaminated throughout all different water sources and also indirectly due to the lack of water. So we started with food production, and when, for example, pathogens and heavy metals are in irrigation water, the surface of the crop can be polluted by pathogens, but also, for example, heavy metals can be absorbed by the crop. However, also at street markets, the crop can be contaminated when the crop is washed, which is a common practice on street markets. Thereby, often by a lack of safe water, cross-contamination of pathogens can take place when crops are washed in the same water, which is not refreshed sufficiently. And these cross-contamination can also take place in fresh cutting vegetable factories. The lack of safe tap water can also indirectly affect food safety. For example, when sellers on street markets or consumers at home are not able to wash their hands according to hygiene standards, fecal oral transmission can take place. Yeah. However, does contamination in early stages of the food system always endanger food systems? No. Heating or cooking fruits and vegetables before consumption kills pathogens and avoids food infections. However, heavy metals can't be removed by heating, and heating can even increase toxic elements in food. For example, arsenic in organic form can become inorganic, which is more toxic to humans. Now let's focus on another example. Fish and seaweed are promoted as a healthier and sustainable alternative protein source. So local stimulation of agriculture to meet the growing protein demand is taking place on a larger scale. However, both fish and seaweed are prone to heavy metal contamination present in water bodies, whereby trace elements such as mercury can be accumulated in the food. There are shellfish are also prone to pathogens from wastewater, for example, for the pollution of norovirus or E. coli. And also water pollution can affect fish production. For example, in 2017 in Norway, high concentration of nitrogen and phosphate from inland waters induced algae blooming, and it resulted in cyanotoxin poisoning by the fish, and it killed tons of fish. As wastewater often contains high concentrations of phosphate and nitrogen, some farmers prefer wastewater over fresh water. And these farmers have high production due to the higher nitrogen nutrient concentrations in the water, while reducing costs at the same time from fertilizer use. However, as we saw in the presentation, the flip side is that heavy metals and pathogens can affect food safety. There are also differences found between Africa and Asia. Asia is more industrialized compared to Africa, so on average, high concentrations of trace elements are present in wastewater. However, by colleagues from Wageningen Environmental Research, river pollution increased the most on the African continent. So lessons learned from Asia might help to avoid the negative effect of water quality on food security in Africa. Thereby, the presence of safe tap water is a crucial aspect in food processing and food consumption. So WASH, which is the acronym for water, sanitation and hygiene, is a crucial element in food systems. So as we discussed, pathogens for human waste related to consumption highly affect food security when sanitation is not improved and access to tap water for personal hygiene is not possible. However, we saw in the database of the core collection from Web of Science, we didn't find any article with the combination of keywords WASH and food systems. Thereby, potable water is also overlooked as an essential element in food security. Sufficient amount of water consumption is crucial for human health. The quantity and the safety of the water is essential to avoid diarrhea, so nutrients from a diverse diet can absorb by the body. So to conclude, our analysis provides a comprehensive insight on the effects of interactions between water quality and food systems on food security, and more collaboration between water managers, agronomists, food technologists, and nutritionists is needed towards a common goal: healthy diets and food safety. Thereby, more research is needed between the link of WASH and food security, including drinking water in food systems, and how WASH interventions can improve food safety. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thijs. I think there will be one person very happy with what you said. That lady is called Gerda Verburg.
Okay.
And she was one of our high-level panelists earlier yesterday. And she is heading Food and Nutrition Agency of the United Nations. and she was complaining that there wasn't enough input from the water community. So that might be something you want to look into. A second one that comes up to me is that we had quite a lot of contributions earlier this week on food loss and food waste. And I think you're adding a dimension to that. That's, I would say it's probably the waste side of things, that if it's not hygienic and not practiced well, then we're actually contaminating some of the very good foods that we have. And my last remark would be maybe search under eco-sanitation.
Okay.
You might really find some interesting results there, or composting toilets, or a few buzzwords like that. But thank you very much. My main question is, how do you get this type of knowledge translated into something that the average person can actually work with or understand? What would be your angle to do that? Help people like John or Samir to design their programs.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what really important is, I think food is affected by a lot of different ways. Water is in a lot of different ways affecting food, and I think it's good to look at the whole value chain. So, for example, when you're irrigating with wastewater, it might not be a problem, and it depends, of course, also on the type of pollution in the wastewater, but also tackling, for example, that you irrigating with clean water, also without pathogens, but further on in the food system, there's no good sanitation available, then your intervention is not that effective. So so it is complex. But
or the fish start dying because they don't have enough nutrients.
Yeah. So that's
I mean, also, it's the other part.
So I think it doesn't give answer on your question what I'm saying, but I think by for example to make it, how do you say, more alive to persons who are not experts in this kind of field, I think it's maybe good to have an apple in your hand, or lettuce, or another crop, and just explain how water is involved in it directly, but also indirectly, and maybe that gives a more alive idea about how important safe water and is, and also how important it is to be to not overuse water, and to think about what your influences is. So
Well, you have a big audience now with people from a lot of different disciplines. So maybe part of the answer is talk also to people from other disciplines and get together and, define what you've already been doing. And I see Soraya nodding her head. We'll come back to you. Last but not least, Peter Knappig, you have been very, very patient. So the floor is yours.
Okay, just as a segue between Thijs's talk and mine, I'll say that we're stepping into kind of a semi-arid region where we have deep water tables, and the deeper you go in an aquifer, generally speaking, the less of a problem the sort of surface contamination problems are, and the more of a problem deeper geogenic contaminants are. So that's kind of a segue for me mentally anyway. So there's a number of impacts from overexploiting an aquifer system that have been discussed a lot at this conference. The most obvious one that everyday farmers connect with on a very pocketbook level is that falling water tables drive up electricity costs for pumping, and that forces farmers and anybody that's dependent upon the aquifer to install really expensive new wells, especially in regions where the water table is hundreds of meters below the surface and falling. Something that's a little bit less recognized, a little bit less studied, is the fact that the groundwater quality tends to deteriorate with depth. The most common kind of deterioration is an increase in total dissolved solids or salinity if you're in a coastal area. That's noticeable to consumers when people are drinking that, or farmers will see their crop yields go down and their soil salinization go up. What's even less commonly studied is that, and I think more of a problem is that even as the total dissolved solids and salinity stay pretty fresh, geogenic contaminants like arsenic and fluoride can slowly creep up. That arsenic has a number of effects on human health and disease, but the one relatively quantifiable relationship is that it decreases childhood IQ, which propagates through for a lifetime income and earnings. And so all of these things have a negative impact on household wealth and regional wealth. So the goal of this study is to understand the long-term impacts of intensive irrigation pumping of aquifers on human health and economic development in regions solely dependent upon groundwater. This is our study area in the Central Highlands of Mexico, most economically and agriculturally productive region of Mexico, stretching all the way up into northern Mexico near the US border. It's semi-arid in the center of the country and arid in the north. We've been studying the falling water tables over the last several decades. Since the Green Revolution around the 1940s, and they started installing tube wells, a very common story around the world, the water table has been falling by tens of meters every decade. And it's typically somewhere around 150 meters below surface today. So there's a general relationship as in this area, which we're in many areas like it around the Pacific Ring of Fire, for example, where you have subduction zones, volcanic rocks, shallow geothermal heat. You tend to have highly correlated arsenic and fluoride concentrations increasing with depth. This is just an empirical fit to that, what that looks like for arsenic concentrations, where we have well depths versus in the right-hand side here, and they're color-coded according to specific conductance to give you an idea of what the TDS or the mineralization of the groundwater is. So as you get deeper, even while the water stays pretty fresh and good to drink and good crop yields, the arsenic concentrations are creeping up with depth. So we can also quantify, the equations didn't really work out in this, but there are some font issues. But there's a number of papers that we can try to, that have equations that we can estimate the IQ reduction from children drinking arsenic in their drinking water at different levels. It's one of the most interesting, consistent things about that finding is that it's highly exponent. There's a highly exponential. So at the low end of the arsenic concentrations is when you see the greatest reduction in IQ, when you go from 15 to 30 or 30 to 50. That's where there's the greatest differences. And that's really relevant because around the world, countries are setting their arsenic drinking water limits at very different levels. Bangladesh has 50, Mexico has 25, and the US has 10, and the Netherlands has 3. So those are very significant benchmarks that countries are setting. Each IQ point reduction has approximately 2% reduction in per capita economic output, according to a big study by Atina and Dresand around the world. So all of these effects have negative impacts on wealth. If they were to mitigate the problem of the falling water tables, then they'd have to decrease the rate of pumping through improving irrigation technology, or perhaps reducing output, food output, if that was ever feasible politically or economically. Households currently, if people want to drink better, safer water, they have to pay for it out of pocket at the household level, and that could include filtration or alternative sourcing like rainwater harvesting or bottled water. Currently, bottled water costs a family about $600 per year in Mexico, and that can be very, very expensive for a household income in Mexico. So this is a very simple, as simple as possible, dynamic systems model for this talk. And we have kind of a boundary condition on the left-hand side where we're assuming 3 different scenarios for irrigation pumping. You're going to see the gold scenario, which is going to be the business as usual scenario where water tables will continue to fall, lift heights will increase, and that will result in more costs to farmers, and that will cut into their profits over time, even with large government subsidies for electricity. So in addition to falling water tables, that's one stock in the systems model. Another stock is well water arsenic, and the final stock is household wealth. And so we want to look at how the arsenic, this systems model allows us to look at how arsenic in well water affects childhood IQ, and then with a long lag time will eventually affect household wealth. And we can also quantify the 2 mitigation methods of you drinking bottled water, and we can evaluate both the cost and the benefit of that with this model, and also reducing pumping rate and look at the cost and benefit of that on household wealth and also cost farm profit. So this is kind of a busy slide, but it's on the upper left-hand corner. It just shows these 3 different scenarios where groundwater pumping continues to increase as it has over the last 80 years. And the next panel over shows lift height or depth to water table and how that will continue to fall over the next 100 years in the most likely scenario. The blue scenario is where farmers, where the region either becomes extremely efficient with irrigation water, with recycling, or where the region shifts to a different economic activity that doesn't use as much groundwater. And you can see that the lift heights or the water table for the blue curve, this recovery scenario is still going to be very slow. Even if all pumping stopped today, it would still take centuries for water tables to come back to where they were before. And so if we follow the business as usual scenario, we can see on the right hand, the 2 upper right hand side panels, that the electricity cost to farmers goes up and up. Agricultural revenue goes up and up, and which sounds like good. You know, some people are making money here, and there's lots of jobs. But arsenic concentrations are creeping up over these 100 years in these wells, and that would gradually bring down the rural population's IQ that's drinking that water, for example, in this one model. Okay, that over in terms of expected lifetime earnings, the business as usual scenario around 50 years starts to reduce, significantly reduce lifetime earnings of people drinking the water. And the panels across the bottom are just looking at how this kind of adds up to impacting the state, the farm sector GDP and the state GDP over time. And also it shows that if everybody was to stop drinking arsenic water in their water today, that there would be a significant boost in their GDP and their household incomes. So that this is the, so in conclusion, falling water tables lead to a host of problems down the road in a region that's exclusively dependent on groundwater. And the impacts and recognition of these problems have long lag times and these kind of hide the true externalities of big agricultural production in arid regions. The cost of mitigating exposure to arsenic are large relative to household incomes currently, about 5%, but the economic return on investment is for mitigation at any level, household or basin level, are large, and it will take many centuries for the aquifer to actually recharge from today. So that's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Has this research already been published?
No. Hoping to work in that direction. Yeah.
Well, I would say run for it, because next year the World Water Development Report is going to be on groundwater. Mm-hmm. If your publication is not up there yet, it will not be referenced. So you have to hurry and make sure it gets there before September.
Okay.
Just a warning signal.
Yeah. Thanks. I need all the motivation I can get. Yeah.
No, that's what I would say is motivating. It's the flagship UN publication, so you better get in there. So what I picked up is a few things. One is that we're back to fluoride and arsenic again, which also showed up in other presentations today. I was again thinking, how can we translate this into education and to informing people?
Yeah. So in the main kind of target audience in terms of the broader impacts of this work would be more first. There's multiple stakeholders and impacts that we hope to address with this research. One would be, and this doesn't really answer your question, one would be sort of city, state, and federal policymakers and water managers. And I know that doesn't answer your question because that's not what you asked. But I did want to say that what we're showing does fit with what you called for at the beginning of the session, which is we're showing how this hits people's pocketbooks, everybody, not just the common good, rural households,
Yep.
tax bases,
Yep.
rich corporate farmers, shareholders. This hits everybody's pocketbooks eventually. And I feel like that's the number one sort of impact of this translatory focus. But in terms like how this, so, well, I guess we partner with a small NGO based in San Miguel called Caminos de Agua. Dylan Terrell's the CEO of that. And they basically, we fused our work together so that they basically piggyback on our data, and we use them, or we work with them as kind of entries to communities, and making sure that the data that we collect on people's wells gets translated into prioritization for rainwater harvesting systems and town hall meetings where they go in. So it's sort of through partnerships. Does that make sense? I'm blasting out like what best way I can describe it in 5 words or less.
No, that's okay. I'm quickly going back to Patty for Q&A stuff because we have only a few minutes left, and I wanted to also have another go back to John after all these presentations and giving him a chance to react. So first, Patty, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lisha, and thank you, Peter, for your presentation. So we have a few questions already. I'll just try to read them out really quickly. The first one is, probably your presentation includes indirect references to managed aquifer recharge techniques, that's MAR techniques, as it is an IWRM technology with proven advantages and scarcely considered in most of the presentations. Please, to what extent MAR is conducted in your use cases? Is general water quality improved? What are your expectations in the mid-long terms using MAR to reduce salinity, emergent compounds, heavy metalloids, pests, etc. in semi-arid regions? That's the first question. And then the second one is, can you propose to stop pumping water for irrigation in some specific regions, considering its water table level? Over to you, Peter.
What's the second question again? I need.
Okay.
I got all the words. I just didn't get the meaning. What is it? Can you say it again?
So I think the question is, would you propose to stop pumping water for irrigation in specific regions, considering their water table level? Is that something you would recommend based on your research? I think that's what the question is asking. Yeah.
So the first question is that there's tons of room for expansion in MAR technology in Mexico. I think I'm not really sure it's being used anywhere in a large scale in Mexico, but I could be very wrong about that. Not in this area that we're working in. There's lots of room for expansion. There is ad hoc MAR, and that is this. When I say ad hoc, I mean irrigation return flow and leaking municipal pipes. You know, city pipes are all supposed to leak something like 20 to 50% of their water. So hey, there's some artificial recharge to the aquifer that we're recovering. But definitely there's huge room for expansion, I think, in central Mexico for MAR. And the second question is that is kind of question that as a hydrogeologist, there is an academic hydrogeologist say, yeah, sure. Oh, we would love to go out and say, okay, stop pumping here. But of course, that's not going to happen. And in fact, the water managers in the regions tell us to stop giving them problems. Like, don't just tell us we have arsenic in our water, give us solutions. And so I've spent the last 3 or 4 years trying to come up with, so like, I feel like this is a solution by showing it how by giving them sort of a choose your own pathway modeling system, and seeing how those decisions propagate to human development and economic development. Hopefully we're giving them a solution, saying, you know, these are your choices. I don't think stopping irrigation pumping is remotely going to happen, and I think that gold curve is the most likely. And Jaime Hugestiger, who has worked in this region for 20 years, did his master's thesis from University of Wageningen. He has studied the governance systems that allow this gradual, slow-moving catastrophe to unfold. And he thinks there's little chance that there's going to be any control of pumping in the next number of decades. So we have to motivate people to do things a bit differently by showing the dollars and lives.
I would say to be continued, huh? The last Twitter type reaction, John, because you were complaining at the beginning that you were at the beginning.
Yeah,
So
I will
give you
follow
a chance.
I will restate that complaint, because obviously every one of the panelists has thought deeply about how their research is not only applied, but how it can be applied to all the different audiences and in ways that has deep impact. So it's wonderful to see all the presentations. And I'll just go back, and I'll keep this to Twitter length. I will just go back to say, think about the, okay, so in Peter's case, and fantastic research, Peter, excellent applications, think about the people that need to understand what arsenic is, or what pH is, or how groundwater works. If you think about these building blocks that allow them to capture and understand the bigger concepts, that's another level of understanding that I think we need to consider in all research. And how do we get down to those levels that allow people to retain the information at a later time?
Okay. With that blessing, thank you, John. Thank you, all the panelists. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, all the participants that were there. I couldn't identify all of you, but some of you, yes. Great stuff. To be continued. There will be materials on the website. There is a poster menu of people who did not get the chance to speak, but sent in some really interesting stuff. If you have any questions that remain, you can send it to online.conference@iwra.org. If we didn't answer your question, but I think we did pretty good, then we'll come back to you if you told us who you are. Having said that, thanking all of you again for your presentations, for your presence, for your commitment to the topic, and hand over back to headquarters, Callum or one of his colleagues, because we're going to close this session. Thank you very much.